Hello and welcome back to the Alnwick Castle podcast. I'm Daniel Watkins.
And I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And on today's episode, we're welcoming back another of our returning guests, this time with a new discovery.
You might remember Karen Slade from previous episodes of the podcast discussing medieval tiles as well as the scriptorium. She joined us again today as we return to the world of tiles, specifically the Percy tiles, some very rare survivals from the long history of the family that have owned Alnwick Castle since 1309.
Here's our conversation with Karen, and we hope you enjoy it. Today on the Alnwick Castle podcast, we welcome back Karen Slade, aka Company of Artisans Kate Tyler, for your fourth appearance on the podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, how are you fourth time round?
I'm very well, fourth time round. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, it's lovely to be back. Yes, I've been down an interesting trouser leg since I last spoke to you. Trouser leg of tiles. When I first started at Alnwick, we were in, when were we? Was it 2009? 2009, I think, was when we first came up to work at Alnwick. And in 2005, there was a really lovely, nerdy tile book that was published. It was the end of an English heritage project, which is a gazetteer and a lovely big book of the medieval floor tiles of Northern England, you see. And the thing that everybody asks me when I'm up here is, did Alnwick Castle have floor tiles? And of course, no, it didn't, as far as we know. There aren't any that survive. But there are some at Byland Abbey, which is one of the great northern abbeys in North Yorkshire. It's one of the group with Fountains, Revo, Jerva and Byland. So those four all have quite similar floor tiles. So I started visiting Byland Abbey. Whenever we came up to Alnwick on our way back home, we would call in to Byland so that I could have a look at the tiles. And I spotted a couple of the crescent, part of the heraldry, part of the coats of arms of the Percy family. There were some tiles set in the cloister walk with the Percy crescent moon with the little buckle in the middle. And they're very worn because they've been exposed for, since the Victorian period, so they're quite worn out. And they weren't very well made to start with, so they're quite blurred, the images. But so I realised that they were probably going to be in this lovely book, which was written by Jenny Stopford for English Heritage. So I got the book and I looked them up, and so I found this set of 4 tiles, which are the coats of arms of the 5th Earl of Northumberland, who is Henry Algernon Percy. So he was the son of the 4th Earl, which is the Earl that the present Duke, has just written his wonderful book about the Wars of the Roses. So this was the 5th Earl, his son, and he was raised at the court of Henry VII. He was raised alongside Prince Arthur and Prince Henry, who later, because Arthur died, he later became Henry VIII. So he was raised as a young man at the court of Henry VII. And he was given a great honour, which is to become a Knight of the Garter in 1495. And so this set of 4 tiles that's in the book has got the motto of the Knights of the Garter around all 4. And the motto says, in very very difficult to read lettering around these tiles, it says in Norman French, it says, Honi soit qui mal y pense. And it has in the centre the coats of arms of Henry Algernon Percy. But they're very, very difficult to read because in the book, Jenny has done what all tile recorders do, which is to clearly draw where the tile survives, where that piece survives. So that's black and white, and that's quite easy to read. But what she's had to do is to just leave out completely, or to just put in like some grey stippling over the parts of the tile which are very, very worn and difficult to read. But some of the parts of the tile are just not there, they're completely missing. So having found this, I then blithely said, oh, well, I'll have to make you a set of tiles to commemorate this, because they are the Percy tiles. Not realising just how long it was going to take me to find the missing pieces, because the top 2 of these set of 4 They were laid at Byland Abbey, and I think they were laid probably by mistake, probably just because the tile makers had a few spare, or possibly because they still had the wood blocks that were used to make the tiles, and they were setting tiles very close to Byland at Fountains Abbey in 1513 with Bishop Hooby's coats of arms. So Bishop Hooby, Bishop Marmaduke Hooby, which is a wonderful name, Marmaduke Hooby, he was the bishop. He was very well known at Fountains Abbey, and there's lots of things with his coats of arms on it at Fountains Abbey, lots of stonework and things. But the arrangement of the tiles, the way they're laid out and the images on them are very, very similar to the set that was made for Marmaduke Hooby. And as far as I know, there are no connections at all between the Percy family and Byland. So I started looking at, all right, so those two are at Byland, so where are the other two, the bottom two, that are very fragmented, very worn and very difficult to read? And so York Museum has some fragments of these, and so Jenny says, yes, they're at York Museum. But when I was first looking at these in sort of 2009, 2010, York Museum, to go and actually find these fragments and go and see them would mean making an appointment and writing and going to see them. So it wasn't until a few years ago that York Museum put up online on their collections page, you can search for medieval tile, and that's something I do a lot, is just randomly search random museums for medieval tiles just to see if they've increased their collection and put them up online. And so there are some tiny little pieces of these tiles that were found in the street in York in 1888 by some workmen who were putting in a chimney for the Rowntree's cocoa factory. They were digging a chimney, digging the foundations to put a big chimney in for the cocoa factory that make chocolate, and they found these fragments. And so various recorders and tile historians over the years have suggested that there might have been a tile kiln in York, which I'm not sure. There's no evidence of a tile kiln, and that this might have been why they were there. And the reason that they're saying that is because they're not very worn. They're quite easy to see the pictures of, but they are utterly smashed to pieces. And so this year, partly because of our present Duke of Northumberland writing the book about the Wars of the Roses, which is amazing, and partly because we were asked to do a Tudor presentation, because he was awarded, the 5th Earl was awarded this honour in 1495. Hooby's tiles, they think, were made around 1513, because there's some evidence of that, there's some written evidence for that. And it's likely that these were being made around that sort of time. So we're talking sort of the very beginning of the early Tudor period. So I thought, right, I really need to sit down and look at these properly and see if I can try and create some tiles. And I knew that I didn't have time to actually make them. But I thought what I really need to do is start drawing, and to start actually drawing out what I'm going to make as a woodblock for these tiles. So I've just unfurled a piece of paper. So what I did was I spent quite a few evenings and a few mornings drawing out and filling in the missing pieces. So I've got here a set of the 4 tiles, painting that I've done, of the 4 tiles as I think they would have looked, with all the missing pieces in. And partly that's come from the fragments of tiles from the York collection. I was able to identify that at the very bottom corner there are these wonderful little lions, 3 little lions, in part of the tile that are actually split up on the tile. So in the tile itself, you've got the front paws and the little faces of the tiles on the right-hand edge of one tile. And then you've got the lion's tails and the back feet on the left-hand edge of the next tile, spreading across. So they're cut in half in the design. But when you look at the book, you look at the tile book, there is a coats of arms of Henry, Algernon and Percy in the book, but it's a line drawing, and it's actually very complex, and it's very difficult to actually make out how you would make that fit on a tile. So I started researching using my phone, because I was already up at Alnwick. And because I do get confused about all the earls, the 5th Earl, the 4th Earl, the 6th Earl, I do get confused about who they are and when they were. And I actually didn't know as well anything at all about what it means to be a Knight of the Garter. I had absolutely no idea. I'd never looked into it. And so I started researching Henry, Algernon and Percy as a Knight of the Garter. And what I didn't understand was when you get to be a Knight of the Garter, there are only ever 24 Knights of the Garter at any one time, ever. The 24th is the Prince of Wales, so that's now Prince William. And the 25th is the King, or was Queen Elizabeth II. So it's a really rare honour. It's not a hereditary honour, so it can't be passed down through your family. It's only the King now that decides who gets to be a Knight of the Garter. For a brief period during Queen Victoria's reign and up until the middle of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, Parliament also were putting forward suggestions and were very influential. But Winston Churchill, during his time as Prime Minister, the second time round, he then put through an Act of Parliament that made it revert back to what was the King and then became the Queen and now is the King. So it is entirely down to the King who gets this honour. And so when you're given this honour, you have a chair. You have what looks like almost like a choir stall or a little miniature throne that is in St George's Chapel at Windsor. And you get to hang your banner, your flag with your coats of arms on it. You get to put your helm with your feathers on. You get to put your shield and your sword there. But you also then get the opportunity to put a little metal enamel plaque at the back of this chair, which remains. So after you die, because you only lose this honour when you die, unless you do something absolutely terrible and then it's stripped, but that doesn't happen very often. When you die, the next person that comes and sits in your chair puts all their regalia in. But what remains is your little metal enamel plaque. And Wikipedia, being a wonderful thing, has this little enamel plaque of the 5th Earl. And so I was able to see the 5th Earl's enamel plaque that is still there in the chair in St George's Chapel in Windsor. And so I've used this centre with it's got the buckle and the motto around it, but I was able then to use the proportions and to enlarge that and to actually visually by eye work out where all the missing bits were, and also the lettering that was missing around this buckle, and even the buckle itself, which took me a little bit of figuring out because the drawing just didn't look right when I did it. It did not look like, it took me ages to figure out it was a buckle because it didn't look like a buckle. And what I had to do was reverse it because on the tiles, the buckle's actually reversed. So using my phone, I was able to flip the image. But then I actually still had to get Charlie to take the buckle off his trousers so that I could sit and draw it, because I still couldn't get my head around how the tongue of the buckle was meant to go and the bit of the belt that flips around. So this garter, which is the order of the garter, this is actually a physical garter that they are wearing as part of their regalia, as well as it being part of an emblem that they wear on their cloaks. So I very gradually pieced together what these 4 tiles would have looked like. And because I do a lot of tile lettering, I was able to put in the lettering, even though the lettering wasn't present on this picture. I was able to make a good approximation of what this sort of probably about 1500, I think, when these were made, to complete this set of tiles. And so this is the first time, I think, that these have been completed as an image in just about 500 years. So I'm quite pleased with that. And reading up, using Wikipedia, because although we'd bought the Duke's book, we'd left it at home, so I couldn't actually read the Duke's book while I was doing this research. Using Wikipedia and following the life stories of the Earls, I understood then why, because the 4th Earl had been killed 4 years after the Battle of Bosworth, why his son then was raised at the court of Henry VII. And he helped to hold the regalia at Arthur being made a Knight of the Garter 7 years earlier. And when he was made a Knight of the Garter, he was made a knight alongside Prince Henry. So that's how close they were. That's how close this fifth Earl was to Henry, who became Henry VIII after his older brother died. They were made knights together. They swore this oath together. And he was only 18. I hadn't realised that. He was only 18 when he was made a Knight of the Garter. And I bet you there's no 18-year-old Knights of the Garter now. I bet you they're not 18 now. But then he carried on in the service of the king. His son also was being raised at the court. And it wasn't until his son, the sixth Earl, was sent away by Cardinal Wolsey because of this unofficial betrothal to a lady that became very well known, who already had betrothal plans, as did he, who was a lady called Anne Boleyn. So Wolsey sent him away back to Alnwick to separate this couple, this illicit coupling that wasn't allowed to happen. It wasn't then until his brother, Thomas, became very well known because he became part of the uprising of the North, and he was one of the 12 noblemen who went across to petition the Pope to say, don't let Henry set aside his wife Catherine in order to marry Anne Boleyn. Then their fortunes began to fail dramatically from the position that his father had had. And so his brother Thomas and his younger brother, the two brothers, they were two of the earls that went across to see the Pope. And it's at this point that I know that their lands in Yorkshire were taken from them. So this whole set of 4 tiles doesn't survive anywhere. It's just mistakenly laid at Byland, and these fragments, which were uncovered in the Victorian period, were smashed up utterly. They were utterly destroyed. There are no whole tiles that remain at all. And some of these pieces are lost, completely. They've never been found. And I think it's to do with this sudden drop in favour. He died with that issue, and instead of leaving his lands to his heirs, he signed them over to Henry VIII. He had been trying to bargain that Thomas's son, his next eldest brother, his nephew, should inherit. And at first he was trying to make a bargain and have it written into this signing over of his lands that his nephew should inherit when he came of age. He died in 1537, and the Pilgrimage of Grace was in 1536, and so his brother and his other younger brother, he did escape. He got released from prison in the end, but his 2 brothers at the time that he died, one had been very painfully killed, and the other was still in prison. So he then eventually he gave up the idea of leaving this to his nephew, and it was only really like a piece in the small print of the earldom of Northumberland that enabled his nephew then to actually become the 7th Earl. He became the 7th Earl. So it was only really almost like a small print that allowed him to become the 7th Earl, and eventually he was then granted the lands back. But I think during this period when their fortunes changed so utterly because of their opposition to what Henry wanted to do, I think then they lost their Yorkshire lands, they lost the churches that these tiles would have been set in, and I think they were taken up and utterly destroyed because they were so out of favour. So that's why these fragments, I think, weren't worn at all, because they were only in place for about 30 years, 35 years, that were commissioned to celebrate him being given this great honour. So it's been a real proper, detective story, and I just couldn't believe, because I didn't have a reason to read in detail about their fortunes, and I get the numbers muddled up. I get the 4th and the 5th and the 6th and the 7th very muddled up. But it's extraordinary that he was so in favour. He was almost like a brother to Henry. And then to have the 6th Earl and his younger sons be so utterly wiped from history to the point of the physical evidence is dug up and thrown away. And then, thankfully they did then become back into favour, and even the 7th Earl and then the 8th Earl was more of a Protestant, and he was more on Elizabeth's side, and he was fighting the rebels, and it's just extraordinary. It's, if you wrote it in a novel, people would say it was too far-fetched, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they would actually let you write it as a plot twist, that it could actually happen. And they were obviously just such a passionate family, and I think it just shows just how dangerous it is to be beloved of the king, to then lose that favour, and to have the king set himself against you. It's quite extraordinary. It's like very high stakes. And I think they were playing to win, and they obviously didn't take good counsel. They weren't being well advised, I think, on the best way to act. But they were passionate people, and they were obviously very faithful in their beliefs as well. They were very strongly devout. Yeah, they were very devout people, I think, the Percys, and they managed to just keep going. Even, he was restored. I think it was the 7th Earl was restored during Mary's reign, because she was a Catholic queen, and she recognised his faithfulness and restored the family. And then the 8th Earl, he managed to stay out of trouble because he stayed in the north. He didn't go down to court. He stayed out of the way, but he still then ended up sort of getting involved in intrigues to do with sort of bringing Mary down from the north. Mary, Queen of Scots, and he was writing letters, and he was entertaining the French ambassador and talking about the possibility of Mary being restored to the throne. And it's, you just think, goodness me, you've won. Stop gambling. Stop risking your life. On this pursuit of trying to get Elizabeth, overthrown. But this is why I've found all this out, is just because of trying to understand. Why? Because I get asked it all the time when I'm here demonstrating. Why are there no tiles? Why are there no tiles that we can see in the castle with the Percy coats of arms on? Why are there no Percy tiles? And I think I finally understood why. Why there are no Percy tiles. Yeah.
We haven't needed to ask you anything.
Sorry, but I have spent the last 2 visits that we've been up here working at the castle demonstrating tile making. I have spent the last 2 visits waving my arms around in the air and getting very excited and passionate and gossiping. I've been doing nothing but gossiping about the Percys, 5th Earl, because it's extraordinary and it's such a human story. It really is. It's made them really much more real to me. And finding out that he was only 18 when he was given this honour alongside Henry, it's extraordinary. It really is.
So you've got this physical representation in the tiles of the rise and the fall of the Tudor Percys through how well they've been preserved, coupled with the fact that they're just tiny bits.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah, it's a real detective story. And I do have to thank English Heritage and Jenny Stopford for having pulled together as much of this as she did, because they're not really very well recorded up until 2005. So there are some tiles which were laid at Newminster Abbey, which is just outside of, I think it's Newminster. It could be Newbridge. They're a very old set that are in an abbey. They were taken up, they were lost in the Victorian period, but there is just some black and white photographs that remain of them, and you can't see anything there now, which is a site just north of Newcastle. But those are very, very simple chevrons. They're a much earlier form of the Percy coats of arms. They're just the early chevrons. So those are about the closest to Alnwick Castle that were in place, and they're no longer there. And you can't see them. And the only recording of them is in this book. And an earlier archaeological report when they were first dug up, but they've been lost. They're not in a collection anywhere. So yes, it is sometimes a real sort of detective story to find out, because it's people, when they visit a cathedral that's still got tiles, when you visit somewhere like Byland Abbey and you see the tiles on the floor, it's very easy to think that that's what they've always been like. It's very easy to assume that the tiles that you see that remain have been there forever and that there was nothing before. So there are some that date possibly to 1300, and these are Newminster Abbey. There we go. So there's our Percy in very simple form with the chevrons, tile number 4 in this collection, and that's on page 181 of the catalogue. But what you don't see is that history is written by the victor. History is written by the people who get to have the final say. And sometimes, because they are so vindictive, they do attempt to erase the stories of the people who've come before. And I've seen it. This is the second time I've seen it. I've seen it here. So if it wasn't for the 2 that are laid accidentally at Byland Abbey, and it wasn't for Rowntree's building a new chimney for their cocoa factory in 1888, we wouldn't have these at all, because they fell out of favour and they were dug up and thrown away, and it's quite shocking. And I've seen it happen in the Welsh Marches area in the early 1320s, when Edward II, he had the barons, he had a big dispute with the barons, and it happened twice. And the first time the barons won, and as a result they sent away his favourite, who was Hugh Despenser the younger, and he went off and became a pirate for about 10 years. And then the barons rose up again, and this time Edward II won. And so the first thing he did was immediately recall Hugh Despenser and reinstate him to power. And as part of the punishment of the barons that rose up against him again, he took away all their lands and he gave them all to Hugh Despenser. And when we were researching tiles that were laid at Dudley and then laid all the way through the West Midlands and into Wales, we kept finding Hugh Despenser's coats of arms that were laid in all these places, all these priories. But there were only fragments and tiny pieces of coats of arms that had been in the family, and this land had been in the ownership of the family at Dudley for over 200 years. And all that were remaining of their coats of arms there were one diagonal half of part of their coats of arms with 3 little lions on them, where this little diagonal tile had been cut in half to go against a wall, the edge of a wall, so that a diagonal pattern could be set against the square. And they obviously couldn't be bothered to dig up this piece, but every other whole tile was utterly gone. And this family had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, but all trace of their heraldry in the tiles was taken up and thrown away, and Hugh Despenser's coats of arms were put in there instead. So we've seen it happen before with the physical evidence, and it's something that we now know, Charlie and I now know, to question what should be here but isn't. Mm-hmm. And so these tiles being so late, being sort of made in the 1500s, which in tile making terms is relatively late, it was just before the Reformation, at the start of the process which led to the Reformation. And so there were really no new tiles being made after that Reformation period. There may well have been earlier tiles with the Percy coats of arms on in these churches in Yorkshire, which again have been thrown away and utterly destroyed. So, who knows? At least we've got some fragments that remain.
We've got chocolate to thank.
We do. We have the foundations of a chocolate factory chimney to thank for finding these tiny fragments. So yes, I'm very excited. And it wasn't until I was here talking about these with you last time we were up at the end of July, and you said to me, "Oh look," you said, "yes, you've even got the fish, the Delucy fish that are on the coats of arms. You've got them here with the lions." And I said, "The Delucy fish?" And you said, yes, they married into the Delucy family and incorporated their fish into their coats of arms. And I hadn't realised this great big pike fish that I've made previously about 10 years ago for a conservation project that was being carried out at Lesnes Abbey. And Lesnes Abbey is quite near Dartford, and it's now in London, but it was in sort of North Kent. This is a tile that I've reproduced for a project at Lesnes Abbey, and I was asked to make 3 patterns. No, I made 4 patterns, didn't I? 4 patterns. One is of a knight on a horse. 2 are very little geometric patterns that I chose to make, which are quite unique, little sort of 10 centimetre size tiles. And then I made this lovely pikefish. And he's a pikefish because it's a pun, it's a play on the Latin for the name of pike. So the Latin name for pike is Lucy, L-U-C-E. And so the de Lucy family have a pikefish on all of their coats of arms. And so when Lesnes Abbey was destroyed in the Reformation, the tiles were distributed when they were found in the Victorian period. They were distributed, some are in various little London museums, some are actually mounted on a wall in one of the local churches, which is where I got one of the pans from. And this wonderful pikefish tile is in one of their local museums. And it was made by the same tile makers who made the tiles at Westminster Abbey. And when you go to Westminster Abbey in the chapter house, you can see some salmon fish, which are still in situ there. And they were made probably in the sort of 1240s, 1250s, they're very early. And so that salmon probably represents another historic family. I don't know who it represents. But this is the tile with the de Lucy fish on. And the Victorian Albert Museum have got his tomb chest with a figure on it, with a shield, with a pikefish on it as well. But I had no idea that when I made this 10 years ago, that this related to the Percy family. So I'm going to leave this one with you because I have kept a spare. I always make extras. I delivered 4 sets of two of these little batch of tiles that I made to each of the museums and the project. There's a little interpretation centre now at Lesnes Abbey, so they've got a set of the 4 tiles. But I had no idea that they went on to marry into the Percy family. I don't know when that was.
That was Harry Hotspur's dad.
Oh, was it? So very early.
His second wife was Maud de Lucy.
Maud de Lucy. So when are we talking?
So we're talking late 14th century.
Oh, okay.
So maybe the date 1381 comes to mind.
So late 1400s. So this would have been made by then. So that is an earlier part of the Percy tile history. It was found at Lesnes Abbey by the Victorians when they dug Lesnes Abbey originally. So he now needs to go into your collection at Artisans Court for when they're delivering their have a go tile making, make and take tile making, so they can wave at him, because they've been talking about him this weekend, because I brought him up to have behind me and talk about him, but I'm going to leave him so they can have him up as part of their collection. So until I get the chance to make these for you, I'm going to leave this lovely smiley pike for you to have for the rest of the season. All right. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and potentially next year you'll come up with something new, a new discovery somewhere else.
You never know. Yeah, in another 14 years. Yeah, I'm not fast. I can't be rushed. Thank you. Thank you ever so much for having me. It's been lovely.
To learn more about the world of medieval tile making, visit us during our open season and have a go yourself. This craft activity is available for visitors throughout the year at Alnwick Castle.
Or to hear more about it from Karen, look for episode 15 of the podcast, Medieval Tiles, episode 47, Illuminated Manuscripts and the Medieval Scriptorium, or episode 21, all about alchemy.
The podcast will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, I've been Deborah.
And I've been Daniel.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.